Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Giri Bharadari. Yasoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Giri Bharadari. Yasoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Giri Bharadari. Yasoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Kishore Kishori ki jai, Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Maharani ki jai, Gonitai ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So this morning we're reading from Canto 10, chapters 71, and there's texts 14, 15, and 16. So we'll be chanting 14 together. Tatoratadvi Pabata Sadinayakai Karalaya Parivrita Atma Senaya Mridanga Bedi Anaka Shankha Promukhai. Sorry, I said Komukhai, it's Gomukhai, sorry. Praghose Goshita Kakupo Nirakramat. Tatora Tadvi Pabata Sadinayakai. Karalaya Parivrita Atmasenaya Mridanga Berisha Anaka Shankha Gomukhai Pragosa Goshita Kakubo Nirakramat Tatora Tadvi Pabata Sadinayakai Karalaya Parivrita Atmasenaya Mridanga Beri Anaka Shankha Gomukhai Pragoja Goshita Kakubo Nirakramat. Please chant. Tatora Tadvi Papata Sadinayakai Karalaya Pariprita Atmasenaya Mridanga Beri Anaka Shankha Gomukhai Pagosha Goshita Kakubo Nirakramat. Tatora Tadvi Papata Sadinayakai Keralaya Parivrita Atmasenaya Mridanga Bedi Anaka Shankha Gomukhai Pragoja Goshita Kakubo Nirakramat. I was just noticing in the third line that there's like this sense of motion as one's chanting, and it's interesting because it's precisely the subject matter, so it's very wonderfully written. So the word for word, tata, then rata of his chariots, dvipa, elephants, bata, infantry, sadi, and cavalry, nayakai, with leaders, karalaya, fearsome, parivritaha, surrounded, atma, personal, senaya, by his army, mridanga, by mridanga drums, berry horns, anaka, kettle drums, sankha, conch shells, gomukhai, and gomukha horns, pragosha, by the resounding, goshita, filled with vibrations, kakubaha, all directions, Nirakramat, he went out. And the translation for text 14 is the disciples of Srila Prabhupada. As the vibrations resounding from madangas, berries, kettle drums, conch shells, and gomukhas filled the sky in all directions, Lord Krishna set out on his journey. He was accompanied by the chief officers of his corps of chariots, elephants, infantry, and cavalry, and surrounded on all sides by his fierce personal guard. And there's no purport for text 14, so text 15. Nirvaji Karicha Nasipi Kabir Achutam Sahatma Jahapatim Anusubrataya Parambara Parana Vile Panastra Jaham Susambrita Nirbir Asikarma Pani Pihi. So the translation again by the disciples of Srila Prabhupada. Lord Achyuta's faithful wives, along with their children, followed the Lord on golden palanquins, carried by powerful men. The queens were adorned with fine clothing, ornaments, fragrant oils, and flower garlands, and they were surrounded on all sides by soldiers carrying swords and shields in their hands. And there's a one-line purport to text 15. According to Sridhar Swami, the word Baji indicates that some of Lord Krishna's queens were transported by horse-drawn conveyances. And then text 16. Naroshtrago Mahisa Karavatari Anaha Karenubihi Parijana Varayoshitaha Svatankrita Katakuti Kambalisma Paradi Upaskaraya Yur Ati Yuja Sarvata. And the translation for text 16. On all sides proceeded finely adorned women attendants of the royal household, as well as courtesans. They rode on palanquins and camels, bulls and buffaloes, donkeys, mules, bullock carts, and elephants. Their conveyances were fully loaded with grass tents, blankets, clothes, and other items for the trip. And the one-line purport for text 16. Srila Vishwanath Chakrabarti explains that the household attendants mentioned here included washerwomen and other helpers. Om Jnanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shlakaya Chakshurmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manopistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swamrupa Kadamayam Tadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Jyuta Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupan Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghutam Vitam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishaka Vitamscha. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bando Jagatkate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gorangi Radhe Vrindavan Vishwari Vishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Panchakalpa Taribhyas Chakripa Sindhubhye Vachapatitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shrimata Romapada Swami Iti Namine Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shrimata Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Ashtatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So I'm truly appreciating that the Sanskrit verses have that sense of motion, and the whole description is of a procession. So, Srila Vishwanath comments on text 14. that deals with Krishna setting out on his journey. And this is what Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur notes. These are his words. Bata means infantry soldiers, and Sadi means cavalry. He adds, together with the leaders of his chariot corps and surrounded by his own fierce army. And the words that were used, that we chanted together, were Karalaya, Tipraya. So Krishna went out, so that was Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. So Krishna went out of the city, wherein all the kakuba were filled with musical vibrations of horns and madangas. So sorry, that was also Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. So Krishna is setting out with his army, and this is in accord with the advice from Uddhava. Krishna was to accept the invitation to participate in the Rajasuya sacrifice, and as Uddhava puts it, only one who has conquered all opponents in every direction can perform the Rajasuya sacrifice, O Almighty One. Thus, in my opinion, conquering Jarasandha will serve both purposes. So that was Uddhava's direct words of his advice to Lord Krishna, which Krishna had asked of him. And so what it means is that Krishna is setting out with his fierce army and the leaders of the chariot corps. And this points to a quality within Lord Krishna. Just the fact that one is seeing this particular and hearing this description that Krishna is setting out with his fierce army and the leaders of his chariot corps and his infantry. And that quality that's being pointed to is that Krishna is heroic. And heroism, or being heroic on the transcendental level, is defined as being enthusiastic in military activities and being expert in releasing different kinds of weapons. So certainly there's an enthusiasm that's being displayed here just by hearing, these madangas, these kettle drums, this very jubilant sound that's accompanying all the various members of the military division that were accompanying Lord Krishna. So certainly it points to a kind of heroism, being very enthusiastic about military activities. Now, Srila Prabhupada, in his summary study of Srila Rupa Goswami's Nectar of Devotion, he quotes the following statement to describe the effect of Lord Krishna's enthusiastic military activities. So this is a very nice comparison that's been made, just so that one gets some sense of this enthusiasm of Krishna in his military activities and the result. So here is the statement. So the very nice comparison that's made to help one get a deeper understanding of Krishna's enthusiastic military activities. My dear killer of the enemy, just as the elephant, while taking bath in the lake, destroys all the lotus stems within the water by swinging his trunk, so simply by moving your arms, referring to Krishna, which are compared to the trunks of elephants, you have killed so many lotus-like enemies. So that's a beautiful comparison of Krishna going about his military activities and the result of his being enthusiastic in his military activities. Now, there's a description of Lord Krishna and his army being expert in releasing different kinds of weapons, because that's the other component that's part of Krishna's heroism, that quality of heroism. And I'm drawing from the case where the kings were opposed to his kidnapping Rukmini, because there's a brilliant description of just this facet of releasing different kinds of weapons. So here's the description. So remember, this is the same army that's now going in this procession that we're just reading about today, but at a different time. mounted on the backs of horses, the shoulders of elephants, and the seats of chariots. The enemy kings, expert with weapons, rained down arrows upon the Yadus like clouds pouring rain on the mountains. So that's from the 54th chapter of this canto. And now, for a description of the expertise of Lord Krishna. Here it comes. The heroes of the Lord's army, headed by Gada and Shankarshan, and we actually hear of Shankarshan in this little section here that he's also mentioned, could not tolerate the aggression of the opposing kings. Thus, with iron arrows, they began to strike down the enemy's horses, elephants, and chariots. The heads of soldiers fighting on chariots, horses, and elephants fell to the ground by the millions. Some heads wore earrings and helmets, others turbans. Lying all around were thighs, legs, and fingerless hands, along with hands clutching swords, clubs, and bows, and also the heads of horses, donkeys, elephants, camels, wild asses, and humans. So that's all from the 54th chapter of this canto, the description of how Krishna's army with two leaders, Gada and Shankarshan, responded to the enemy kings that were opposed to Lord Krishna's action of kidnapping Rukmini. So the commentary states that the thighs, because it seems sort of gruesome hearing of these dismembered bodies lying on the battlefield as a result of Krishna's very fierce army releasing their iron-like arrows. But the commentary states that the thighs that were lying on the battlefield resembled the trunks of elephants. So there's a certain beauty by virtue of the fact that the killing was done by the army of Lord Krishna. So the killing of so many lotus-like enemies, because that's the other component, the comparison that was made by Srila Prabhupada in terms of Lord Krishna, is certainly depicted in this narration. And the result of this battle of Lord Krishna was the following, because we're hearing or at least there's this quality of heroism that's emerging. So here's the result of that battle, where all this carnage happened. Seeing their armies being struck down by the Vrishnis, who were eager for victory, so note, even there it's mentioned, eager for victory, so that enthusiasm for military activity. The kings headed by Jarasandha were discouraged and left the battlefield. So there's the defeat of other lotus-like enemies. So just to point to the fact of this particular quality of Krishna being so heroic. Now, on this particular occasion that we're reading about today, of Lord Krishna setting out with the leaders of his cavalry and surrounded by his fierce army, he's not actually intending to utilize his army or the cavalry. This time, Krishna wanted to kill only Jarasandha, not so many innocent soldiers. And therefore, and this is Uddhava's suggestion, Krishna, Arjuna, and Bhima were to go to Jarasandha, and they were to go in the dress of brahmanas. And Sri Uddhava had said, so these were Uddhava's words when he was advising as Krishna's minister, and he was advising Krishna upon Krishna's request. Bhima should go to him disguised as a brahmana and beg charity. Thus he will obtain single combat with Jarasandha, and in your presence, Bhima will no doubt kill him. So that is a little bit earlier on in this chapter. So the reason Sri Uddhava had given for this course of action is that, and these were his words, he cannot be defeated when he is joined by his army of 100 Akshahinis. So that was going to be the solution. So here in this enthusiasm for military activities, it's interesting because in this particular case, Krishna's not utilizing his army for the purpose of actually slaying his lotus-like enemies, which even would refer to Jarasandha. But there is a purpose for their presence there and emerge in the next two texts that we read. So Srila Vishwanath comments that Krishna had in fact asked the following questions. So even when he was receiving advice from his minister Uddhava, Krishna asked, and this is for that plan of action that Uddhava is proposing, that Bhima, Krishna, Arjuna go disguised as Brahmanas to beg charity from Jarasandha, because this was going to be the means to actually finally slay Jarasandha and so save so many innocent soldiers. I mean, we read about the carnage that happens. So Krishna was trying to spare so many innocent soldiers' lives. But he asked Uddhava a question based on Uddhava's plan. He said, and this is Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, Krishna asked this question, since they are equal in strength, meaning Bhima and Jarasandha, they are evenly matched, and thus neither is likely to win over the other. So a very sensible observation. But Uddhava, and as per Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, this is what Uddhava replied. Therefore, if Bhima fights in your presence, he will be able to kill Jarasandha. So he's notice here Uddhava is attributing the final success in killing Jarasandha to Krishna. So we're going to hear how that plays itself out up ahead. But it was necessary for Krishna to be present because it would be his presence that allowed for Jarasandha to be killed. Now here, as Lord Krishna departed from the city, Srila Jiva Goswami points out that the directions, so everywhere, was filled with the sound of instruments, and that was part of, creating that whole enthusiastic mood for military activity, even though in this case he's not actually employing it in that kind of way. But he is surrounded by fierce troops and the palanquins, etc., along with the devotion. So there was devotion on the part of everybody who was present there. And this indicates the extraordinary scene. So both the visual element, the devotional component, and part of the devotional component was the musical accompaniment to the procession. So this leads to the next description, and that was text 15. Some of Lord Krishna's queens were transported by horse-drawn conveyances. Baji was the word that was used, and in the BBT translation, it's translated as powerful carriers, but actually it's horse-drawn conveyances. And in addition to the horse-drawn conveyances, there were queens in carts drawn by men on horses and in palanquins, all of whom, as per Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, all these 16,000 queens were faithful to their husbands. So that word that was used was savrataha, and they followed after their husband, meaning Lord Krishna. So Srila Jiva Goswami puts it this way: Krishna was firmly situated in front of all of them. So it's very clear he's the object of devotion, and all the queens in their various modes of transportation, in their devotional mood, it was one of being faithful to the decision and the course of action taken by their husband Krishna, and they were following his lead. Srila Prabhupada gives a description of the palanquins, and this is Srila Prabhupada's description. Riding on palanquins nicely decorated with silks, flags, and golden lace, they followed their exalted husband, Lord Krishna. So he's a little bit more insight into the particular small environments around the queens. Srila Jiva Goswami adds that the women were completely surrounded on all sides without any gap by the soldiers. So that was the purpose of the soldiers. It's a protective function. But at the same time, they were nicely positioned at a distance. So the soldiers didn't have any gap, but they left space so they weren't crowding in on the queens. Because often we have the experience, let's say, when we're in a procession, we may do a Ratha Yatra, and there's one moment where it feels very crowded. Like everybody's crowded around the ropes, your feet are getting almost crushed by somebody who's enthusiastically trying to also hold onto the rope. So in this case, the protective function of the soldiers, they weren't leaving any gap, but they positioned themselves carefully at a distance so the queens didn't feel crowded in. Now, Srila Prabhupada states the following. The infantry soldiers carried shields, swords, and lances in their hands and acted as royal bodyguards to the queen. So that was the purpose of the infantry and the cavalry. So they had a protective function and their weapons were visible. They were already in their hands. So it's not that, sometimes you may keep some weapon in some covering. Not so in this case. They were walking with their weapons right in their hands. So it means that they really fully acting as bodyguards, ready to attack any interference in the procession. Finally, Srila Prabhupada, again in Krishna book, he says, in the rear of the procession were the wives and children of all the other followers, and there were many society girls also following. Many beasts of burden, like bulls, buffalo, mules, and asses, carried the camps, bedding, and carpets, and the women who followed were seated in separate palanquins on the backs of camels. So interesting. It's a whole different scenario. The verse is separate, and they're the last part of the procession. So you're getting a whole different array of animals being present. Bulls, buffalo, very sturdy creatures, mules, asses. And the reason there were all these sturdy creatures is that they had the task of carrying the camps, the bedding, the paraphernalia that would be used once they actually came to rest for the night. And notice also that it was more the simple attendant ladies. They were also in palanquins, but the description is quite different. It's not palanquins like the queens were being carried by very strong men, or sometimes there'd be horses. And in fact, even in one of the commentaries, there's mentioned that the men were able to walk as fast as horses, the ones that were carrying the queens. But here, these particular palanquins are situated on the backs of camels. So I was thinking about that, and I was thinking it must be a little bit difficult to balance a palanquin on a camel, considering the camel has its humps. But somehow, I guess it's tied in a particular way. So these ladies were on the backs of camels in their palanquins. And of course, those particular helpers that were making up the last part of this procession of Lord Krishna leaving the city were washerwomen. And Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he says that it was particularly the washerwomen who tied houses made of ushira grass to the backs of camels. So, say in modern days, one may go camping and one may have a very large backpack. Sometimes you see persons that are visiting a city and they may have come from a camping expedition, and you see they're carrying a super huge bag, and that obviously holds some sort of lightweight tent that's used. In this particular case, the tents, I guess, I don't know if they're pre-made or it's just the raw material for the tents, this ushira grass. It's tied to the backs of the camels. So I don't know if it's something that then you unroll and then set up, or it has to actually then be assembled on spot. I presume some of it might be pre-made, already tied, and maybe it's easier then to set it up and not take so long. So it's the washermen who loaded the equipment onto the carts, but it was the washer ladies who tied the equipment to the various beasts of burden. Now, there's a second quality of Krishna that emerges from this description. And now I find it just sort of struck me, is he has this quality of being happy. And the definition of Krishna's transcendental happiness is that, or somebody who is transcendently happy, is that one is always joyful and never touched by any distress. So that's the definition of happiness on the transcendental level. And nectar of devotion draws attention to Lord Krishna's enjoyment. This is how the description is in Nectar of Devotion. The ornaments which decorated the bodies of Krishna and his queens were beyond the dreams of Kuvera, the treasurer of the heavenly kingdoms. So that's part of being transcendentally happy, that there's also the possession of items that are extremely beautiful and valuable, adorning the body. And here it's Krishna and his queens were decorated in that kind of way. So there's that quality that's emerging also from this description of this procession. And finally, the quality of Krishna as being all auspicious is also apparent, because by definition, being all auspicious refers to one who's always engaged in auspicious welfare activities for everyone. So you may ask, because this is quite profound, that Krishna was actually engaged in a welfare activity that would benefit everyone. And then you analyze it. He was taking the queens, and that was why they were present in the procession. He was taking the queens because they were eager to go to the Rajasuya sacrifice. They were very excited about it. And he's employing his army to protect them. He was also arranging for the killing of the demoniac Jarasandha. So that's obviously going to benefit the whole world, because that was part of that purpose of that journey. There was going to be that stopover in dress where they were going to don Brahminical outfits in order to try and arrange for hand-to-hand, one-to-one combat to Jarasandha and be able to kill him in that way. So Krishna's making that arrangement. That's obviously going to benefit everyone because it's a demoniac entity. And Krishna was also going to free the imprisoned kings as a result of that action. So again, he was performing welfare activity for the benefit of the world, because it was several thousand kings that were imprisoned, and they were persons of a devotional character. So obviously it's going to benefit the whole world if these kings can return to their rightful rulership position. And not only that, Krishna was going to make possible, just by virtue of making this arrangement, of freeing the kings, killing the last demoniac entity, Jarasandha, he was going to allow for the performance of the Rajasuya sacrifice, which would actually, according to the plans of Maharaj Yudhisthira, it establishes him as the preeminent monarch out of all the monarchs. And naturally, because all the monarchs that would be present there were in a mood of devotion to Lord Krishna, it would be the most auspicious sacrifice to be performed. So hence this other aspect that's emerging there of this quality of Krishna and his all auspicious, just by this arrangement and from what we're gathering from his starting this procession and what the purpose of the procession actually was. So that was as far as I was able to go in extracting something from these 3 verses, because it's highly descriptive. So if there's any thought to expand on this rather wonderful description, please feel free.
You mentioned when Uddhava was advising Krishna about how to handle Jarasandha. And one of the reasons was that Jarasandha had 100 Akshohinis. And, I was thinking the other day, just take that figure and compare it to the battlefield Kurukshetra. The Kauravas have 11 Akshohinis, and the Pandavas have 7 Akshohinis. And altogether, so that's 18 Akshohinis altogether. And it's explained that about 600 million people got killed in that battle. So now you imagine that's just under, you know, a fifth of what Jarasandha had as an army. It's like a mind-boggling army that this fellow have put together. 100,000 Aksuhinis.
Yes, he'd been engaged in subjugating so many kings, so the imprisoned kings were the ones that refused to pay tribute to him. And I forget the figure, was it 120,000 kings?
20,000.
20,000. So yes, thank you so much for putting that into perspective. So it only serves to further emphasize the rather brilliant advice given by Uddhava, and of course Krishna, allowing for Uddhava to shine in that kind of way, and then putting it into practice means that truly Krishna really was performing a major act of welfare for the whole world in terms of saving so many millions and millions and millions of soldiers. If 600 million was from the Kurukshetra battle, as you've so kindly pointed out, then, and that was, you said 17 Akshahinis. So then if it's 100 Akshahinis, and if you take that 600 million died there, so I don't know what figure that brings the death toll to. So truly, it's a very extraordinary act of welfare for the whole world by making the simple arrangement of one-on-one combat, so you just eliminate the main entity. It's rather wonderful. But thank you for highlighting that comparative figure. It really puts into perspective the particular power of Jarasandha.
Hare Krishna Mata, thank you so much for your class. I I wanted to see if we can have some discussion about Jarasandha's character. So Jarasandha kept attacking Krishna, kept getting defeated, but he still kept doing that. And it was part of Krishna's Leela, but Krishna still went to Dwarka. And lot of times, currently, a lot of young people go after motivational speakers to find these qualities of not quitting. And but if we look in scriptures, there are so many heroes: Jarasandha, Bhim. No, maybe Jarasandha is not a hero, but Bhishma Pitama, Bhim, Arjun. And we find these characteristics in men that it's very difficult to find in this age. And so lot of times I've seen also in spiritual life that when the sadhaka starts Krishna consciousness, they truly have a dream that they want to progress in Krishna consciousness, but due to own personal character defects, due to character defects of other people, circumstances, lot of time sadhaka quits and goes continues resumes the material plans he had once before. So when there is suffering, a lot of dreams die. So but Jarasandha, even though he kept getting defeated and he was fighting Krishna, but still was very persistent. Do you do you have some ideas about this topic of quitting when even if it is a worthy cause, but when there is suffering involved, a person quits. Do you have some ideas about it?
So your question has to do with that somebody may be on the path of self-realization, cultivating devotion to Lord Krishna, but then the circumstances or something um, has the person giving up that path and resorting to their previous plans for their material life. So, and you were sort of looking at somebody who was not on a devotional path, but actually having such incredible persistence in pursuing that goal of somehow wanting to kill Krishna. So, uh, well, Jarasandha was serving a purpose for Lord Krishna because Krishna is the supreme controller. So he understands the mentality of everyone. And he also makes arrangements that are for the benefit of everyone, including somebody who's opposed to him. So his particular plan that permitted Jarasandha and gave room for his persistence um, worked splendidly because not only could Jarasandha carry on with his persistence to keep coming each time, even though he was defeated, it also allowed Krishna to have a means for Jarasandha to assemble all the demoniac kings, his fellow associates, and sort of wipe them out at the same time. So instead of having to go individually, Jarasandha did the work for him. So this is Krishna being the supreme controller, and it's actually fulfilling the desires of those different other demoniac kings. They're also getting an opportunity to fight Krishna because that's what they want. So now it's also a sign of not good intelligence on the part of somebody like Jarasandha. Because even in one occasion, Krishna pretended to run away. I mean, he ran away, but Jarasandha made the assumption it was out of fear, which is not the case. So it's also not such good intelligence if you've been defeated 16 times and all your soldiers have been decimated. Like, I read the one description of the decimation, complete decimation. Not to have grasped that this might be an entity that you may have to submit to. He did not. And that's the nature of the demoniac mentality. It's always actually thinking, I am the greatest. I am going to control everything and having bigger plans of how you're going to expand what you have. That's a demoniac mentality. So, not being able to recognize a greater personality. Now, if somebody is in the present time taking to the path of devotion, it's actually trying to cultivate a mood of submission to a very great personality, the supreme personality, Lord Krishna, and takes up devotional practices, which means a certain rigorous control of one's mind and trying to bring order into one's life. So regulate one's activities. Um, it requires cultivating a mood of dependence on Lord Krishna because it's not possible to do on one's own. I mean, the mind, Arjuna describes that the mind is, like a wind. You can't bring it under control. It's just going its own way and pulling one wherever it's going. So the only way that the mind can actually be brought under control is through taking up, in this age, that process of submission to that Supreme Personality is considered to be a very simple way because of the difficulty of the inadequate strength that one has. I mean, one in this age, everybody's supposed to be born with a body that's actually pretty weak. Like all the time you hear a person has this difficulty, that difficulty, that difficulty. This is a symptom of this age. We're actually born in physically poor bodies. The intelligence isn't very strong. That's why the mind is so out of control. So if one is thinking that one wants to take to a path where one is practicing submission to this great Supreme Personality, then the chanting of the Maha Mantra is a means to regulate one's life. Because that's the first part. One isn't at the mercy of one's mind, because that is what drives one back into taking up all one's previous material activities, minus the component of trying to submit to a supreme, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So if one takes up that practice of chanting, one will begin to notice that one has a better ability to be objective, even about one's own material plans. One will actually see that, will be able to see more carefully what those plans are, what the consequences of those plans may be. How much control does one really have over how those plans are going to work out? One can be a lot more objective. This is only possible because of regulating the mind and regulating one's activities. The intelligence can work better. So if that practice is not there, because it's the prescribed method for cultivating that submission to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, if that practice is not there, there's no sense of dependence on anyone except oneself. One sees oneself, it's demoniac mentality. One sees oneself as being fully in control, fully capable of manifesting, and often even spiritual teachings in the present age, New Age one, you manifest things. I mean, it's very atheistic. So it all has to do with the very unfortunate physically weak bodies that appear in Kali Yuga, controlled by the mind. That is why it becomes, one just is already at a disadvantage. So it does require praying and cultivating dependence on the Supreme Personality of God to even be able to practice the prescribed method to try and regulate the mind, try and regulate one's activities, try and regulate one's life, so that in fact one can elevate one's consciousness. One can go beyond just what is materially visible, or how one's mind is driving one, whatever one's bringing from previous life, some picture of oneself, some idea of what it is one should be succeeding at. It's not actually real. The reality lies in the connection with the Supreme Lord, because He is the Supreme Controller. And if you have that connection, then you can actually understand better what is His will. And by understanding that, one can actually arrange one's life in a much more harmonious, realistic way where everything makes sense. It's not some fanciful idea, just an idea, a delusory idea, or an illusory idea. It's factual. So I don't know if that was adequate response, but that's how I'm understanding something of your question. Subal has some comment.
Yeah, just to add what you cover, in one sense, there's a description in the Bhagavad Gita that says Arjuna is saying that, for a devotee who falls who doesn't achieve the goal, or um, who is not able to complete the purpose of performing devotional service, the purpose of yoga, is like a ribbon cloud with no, there is, you're not here, you're not there. So it's a very awkward position when um, when a devotee is in a situation that is not perfectly situated in devotional service, when there is mix. So it's very awkward. You're in the middle of something. You're not this, you're not that. You're not a materialist, you're not a pure devotee. So it's a very awkward situation. So with a materialist like Jarasandha, and you make an example, but then we see, now that they're very focused and determined in achieving their goals, their materialistic goals, whatever materialistic goals they have. And it's very much clear. Sense gratification, power, uh, position, all these different things are there, and it's very clear. When we are a devotee that is neophyte, that is mixed, we have materialistic desires and we have devotional desires, and they don't have the same. They're not the same. They're quite, they don't mix together well. So so then in that position is very difficult. If you remain in that position, it's very difficult to achieve success because it's not clear. So that's why the devotees sometimes have difficulties, that they have to go to some periods of purification in which you fall down. But Krishna assures that whatever we do in the path of devotion is forever there, and it will continue. So, from the perspective, like Krsnarcana put it in her answer, is that's the reality. The reality is that now, as a devotee, we are on the Krishna's care, and we just have to go through all kinds of purification situations in which are designed to take away all the delusional desires, as she was explaining. And the process of chanting help is a prime process that gives us that type of purification. But that's what appears to be that a materialistic person is being quite successful in achieving their goals and their determination, and they have all these things in place, and devotees sometimes are not here, not there. But the reality is that the materialistic people, whatever they achieve, Bhagavad Gita say, is, it amounts to zero, because at the end, Krishna explained, whatever endeavors they have is going to be defeated. There, I can't remember how Krishna puts it in the 9th chapter. Whatever endeavors, whatever endeavors for achieving, for conquering, for whatever it is going to be defeated at the end. With the devotee is different. With the devotee is guaranteed that one will continue gradually to elevate oneself. So it's just the appearance, like that. I was just gonna.
Thank you very much for adding. Appreciate very much. Your question has us thinking greatly. Thank you. Is there anything else? Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.